Hello, I'm Margaret Gilbert from Corporate Contracts. I'm the Director of Corporate Contracts. I'm an international consultant and trainer in the area of procurement and contracts. I'm also asked to speak at international procurement conferences, and I'm also the author of the Contract Matters books, which there is a series which can be found on my website. Hello, my name is Margaret Gilbert from Corporate Contracts, and this video is about procurement and risk. This is part one of the video, and there'll be a part two that you can also see. So welcome. So I just want to introduce to you the book Contract Matters, Procurement and Risk. It was written by myself as well as Anthony English, and in part two there will be a piece by himself about his side of the fence, so to speak, in respect to supplier side. So the book is written for both buyer and supplier, and it is basically looking at the issue of risk and how to manage that risk and how not well it is done at present, and to look at options about how risk should be managed. And of course there are two types of risk. One is internal risk, which is the responsibility of the buyer side, of course, and there's the external risk, which has to be decided to and worked through in relation to the risks attached to the supplier, etc. So this brings up to the need to consider risk when undertaking procurement, and this is often left and then sort of tried to be dealt with later, whereas it's much better to be dealt with at the beginning. It is time for some honesty in terms of the whole aspect of risk, and the fact that perhaps it should be a shared risk rather than just sort of assumed that it is the supplier responsibility to undertake and to absorb that risk. So the problem with that idea is that the supplier is just going to pass on that risk to the buyer by way of increased pricing. So they might wear it for a certain period of time, but they're not likely to do it for a long period of time, and it's not right that they should do that either. So if we look at the buyer side, what often happens when it comes to risk is that it's an automatic assumption that it is the supplier responsibility. It is not even talked about, it is just assumed, and that is not the best way to deal with it. Because frankly, it is the buyer responsibility to be aware of the risks and to work with the supplier, and I repeat the word with the supplier, to work through the necessary issues that needs to be worked through. And for a significantly large procurement, that risk can be equally significant. So it might be that it does need to be shared between the two parties, because otherwise the supplier might well not be able to manage that risk if it's left to them. So if we look at the supplier side for a moment, is that suppliers equally need to think about how are they going to manage this issue. Now, what has happened to date has been is that they have just not mentioned anything, not said anything, not had a discussion with the buyer. They have just sort of taken it all on themselves to wear the risk. And some savvy suppliers have worked around it by actually increasing the pricing to the buyer. So it is, as I said, it is time for an honest conversation between both buyer and supplier, and sometimes it's going to be a case of the supplier bringing it up to the attention of the buyer, because it's not likely to be the other way around. So when we look at risk and all the issues attached to it, there's a need to have a specific procurement framework that you should be following, and part of that framework is risk. So it is really important to be able to manage. So the question is do you have a framework? If so, that's great. If not, then perhaps it's time that you do so.